fight. They hated the fascists, I think, most of them anyway. They had no food, no clothing. The South where we went was the poorest part of the country, and the people were just not happy. They were, in many ways, a lot like we are today. We had, as a country, are just at a crossroads. If they were at the same point, and they were as unhappy as I believe we are.
My first impression was wet and cold, and we pitched our tent in the middle of a grape orchard. And it was real hard to dig yourself a foxhole. But I had a man with me come out of mine. He said, "Just you gotta get away from here." And he went and got some dynamite, and he'd give us a foxhole.
I'm going to have to relate what Archie Bunker said, who says based in Foggia. And he says, "It was a nice place, except there were too damn many foreigners there, all talking Italian." That's Archie says.
Okay, the next question might not be that easy, and if you can't answer or don't want to, it's okay, but now that you've told us a little bit about your first impressions, what were your expectations when you arrived there? And I know we have people who were in the air, fought in the air, and we had the ground people who didn't get to go home after their missions were completed and were stuck there for the duration. So, could you tell us what your expectations were?
Well, I was just a kid then. I was about 20 years old. And my expectations were, I want to get home. As soon as I can fly, the more missions I fly, the sooner I'll get home. And that was my expectations, and that's what I tried to do. And I did complete my tour.
Thank you.
Well, I was younger than you, Aki. I was 19 at the time and hadn't traveled very much. Later in life, part of my business experience, I traveled to 67 different countries and back to Italy on I don't know how many times, but the accommodations were a lot better being in a commercial situation. The Air Force was pretty rough, rugged and grim, and what was I expecting? You know what I thought? I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. After all, it was a dangerous business we were in, but I thought of it as an adventure. I was 19 years old, and I've been reading about the World War II ever since it started, and it sounded to me like I was going to get a chance to participate. And I knew my job, I knew my guns, and I was flying together. So for me, it was a keen anticipation. This was an adventure, and I couldn't wait for the next day to come. However, when it came, I wasn't quite that enjoying it that much.
Boy, that about covers it, I would say. The Italians are interesting people. I love the kids. They were hungry, and we had a heck of a time. I remember eating lunch, and those big trays would bump against the garbage can, and I always put extra food on there and give it to the kids, and I got in a lot of trouble over that.
My expectations were sort of, how do I describe them? They were less than they should have been, I think, because the Army and I didn't see eye to eye on many things. And I guess I was a poor example of what a real confident soldier should have been. But I got along all right after I convinced myself that the war was just and that I was doing everything I could that I was allowed to do. My eyes prevented me from from flying. I've been nearsighted all my life. That was a disappointment to me, and it had an effect on my expectations, but in the end it didn't matter. Perhaps it saved my life, who knows? But I think I have to say it was a good thing, because I believe I went in as a boy and I came out a man.
I was the line chief of the 727. My biggest job right quick was to get my people all together and get my 12 birds ready to fight.
Well, going on 95, I forgot the question. What was the question?
Well, going on 66, I forgot the question. No, what are your expectations?
Expectations is, I don't know. They said that not too many of them come back, so you kind of expect that you might not do that. Right? But one of the things I'd like to bring up, we had an old man, gunner, that we called Pop. He was 32 years old.
One thing that I just like to comment before I ask the next question, when I hear these comments about the children, and you know, that is such an American thing from my experience, and having been to Italy and talked to people several times, and the Brits came through this area before you guys did, the combat Brits fighting the Italians, and they weren't as generous. If you talk to any Italian, they don't have the same feeling about the Brits that virtually all the Italians had that lived around the airfields, and felt that the Americans were their saviors, and many of them would have starved to death without the Americans. And the Americans had rules too about, you touched on it, about sharing food, but one thing about Americans that still survives today, I think, is that we're pretty good at breaking the rules.
Well, Jimmy.
Okay, the next question here is, since you guys were in different bomb groups, and there's a lot of variances even between the squadrons within a group, and particularly I think between the people who weren't flying, who stayed longer. But could you tell us just a little bit briefly about your living conditions where you were?
Well, when I arrived there, we were told to report to the supply sergeant. And the supply sergeant issued the 6 enlisted men a 16 by 16 tent. And that's what we were going to live in. He also issued us a cot to sleep in, and a mattress cover, and a steel helmet without a liner. So when we built our tent, but we had no door, we had no heat, and we had no running water. So how are we going to build all this thing, and how are we going to get all this material? So we asked many questions to everybody in the squadron, and one name kept coming up, and that name was Thirsty. And he was the sergeant in the 60th Service Squad. He was a quarter mile away. Well, we had to get things, and the only way to get things is barter. If you had whiskey, cigarettes, candy, gum, whatever, then you swap what you want. So I took a fifth of whiskey, which I had 4/5 of whiskey, which I bought in the States. I took it out of my B4 bag, put it in my field jacket, and I headed for the 60th Service Squadron to find Thirsty. Well, I finally found him, and he was lying on his bunk, and his hands behind his head, and his fatigue hat over his eye. He's laying on his bunk. And I said, "Are you thirsty?" No answer. A few seconds back, "Are you thirsty?" He says, "Yeah, what the hell do you want?" Just like that, you know? So I said, "Look, Thirsty," I told him what I needed. I needed a door for my tent. I needed a stove to keep us warm. I needed hot water. And I needed a bunk. I cannot sleep in a cot. No way Kazakas is going to sleep in a cot. And a stand to hold our helmets when we wash. So he looked at me and said, "What makes you think I can do that?" I said, "Look, Thirsty," and I pulled a fifth of whiskey out. And he leaped for the whiskey, and I pulled it back. I said, "Thirsty, if you want this, you got to deliver the goods. Can you do it?" He says, "Greek, come on, sit down. I want to talk to you." So anyway, after a while, he agreed to do it in 5 days. 4 days later, nothing happened. On the 5th day, we heard a Jeep out front of our tent. We all ran out, and there was Thirsty with all the goods.
Living conditions, living in a tent surrounded by mud. We had a heater that was made of a 55-gallon drum that was cut in half, and it was rigged up with a burner in it that was fueled by, I think it was 50% aviation fuel, and the other was kerosene. And just to light the fire, to keep yourself warm inside that tent, you risked burning your hair off. At that time I had hair, so it bothered me more. Now it wouldn't bother me, but it was grim living there. The only thing that made it palatable, I think, was my crew members. We were 6 of us in the tent, and we were told what to do, where to go, and etc. And we didn't ask questions why or anything else, because you weren't allowed to ask those questions. And the living conditions were grim, but all I can say is they were Cadillac style compared to Stalag 3A, where I ended up after getting shot down. So I wished I was back in a tent again. At least I had food, which I didn't have this time.
Oh boy, Stalag
3A.
3A, okay.
Near Berlin. Luckenwald.
Buchenwald. All right. Well, I don't have a whole lot to say along those lines, I'll tell you. But it was a tough life at that point. But the poor Italian people were really suffering, and that touched me.
When we got overseas, in the beginning, everyone had tents like he's described, and later we built some houses like out of stone, which we got help from the Italian workmen to build. But what I want to tell you about is a problem we had, a big problem. When the 451st commenced operations in January of '44, we moved on to an airfield in a town called Gioia del Colle. And this had been an Italian Air Force base. And the Germans had used it as well, and they both had left wrecked airplanes. There were some German 109s in the junkyard as well as Italian planes. But the field was all grass. There were no runways on it at all. And before we arrived, the American engineers had laid some steel mats on the field to make us a runway, but the end of the runway, the steel mat runway, was over an earth field, because the field was not long enough to provide a fully length runway that we needed. So they had a fill at the end, and they laid the runway on this. And it was the winter time, as everyone knows, and the weather that year, as these people can testify, was very bad. The wind and the snow and the rain came in torrents, and the weather made the runway and the grass and the field very wet. And the airplanes, the heavy planes, these B-24s, when they landed on this steel runway, they mashed it down into the earth. The effect that finally the runway, the steel mats, were 6 to 8 inches lower than the earth on the sides of the runway. And the rain filled that area up to where it was like a canal. Not very deep, only about yay deep, but deep enough that when the planes were using it, they looked like motorboats. And the wind and the rain and the wind and the fume from the planes moving on it was terrible. But the worst thing about it was that stuff froze on the bottom of the planes, and the bomb bay doors wouldn't open. And they made some runs on the targets, and the bomb bay doors wouldn't open, and the bombs wouldn't drop. So some lucky GI on the crews in these planes was assigned to go down into Bombay and hold the switch that kept the electric circuit from keeping the Bombay doors from opening. And when they did that, they dropped the bombs right through the doors, broke all these little rollers that rolled up the side of the airplane. They were cast metal with rollers in them, broke them all off. And I'd see the planes coming back with the doors hanging down and the Bombays open to the wind, and cold as it would be if those doors were closed, imagine how it would be at 40 degrees below temperature with those doors open. And it was a terrible thing, and it caused us to have to move to another airport. And it just, that place was just not suitable. But it was a lesson learned, and it was tough.
Again, the question is the living conditions for you.
Well, I tell you, I lived in a tent with 2 other men, and we had a cot. Each one of us had a cot and 2 blankets. That's what we had. And I said, let me get them mattress covers. We all had a mattress cover, and I'll go to the farmhouse and see if we can't get some mattresses made right quick. So went out there, and this lady, she made us 3 beautiful mattresses. I often wondered whether we was going to get any lice in them or not, but thank God we didn't. So that made it nice. And I got a 6x truck and went to Barry, where all the ships come in and hauled our ammunition in there. And between the layers of bombs, there was all kind of timber. I got a whole load of lumber and brought it back, and we were able to floor our tent and build a frame and put the tent in it. So it come pretty nice for us.
Yeah, we were in that 16 by 16 tent, and you know, it slopes down to about a foot high, so you really only have about 10 by 10 for 4 beds, which is the cot and the mattress covers full of straw. That was our mattress. But I was a German bricklayer there when I went drafted, so I built those walls 6 foot high all the way around, 16 to 16, raised the center pole 6 feet, and we had lots of room. Anyway, laying one day in that cot, I just opened my eyes, I look over across the other cot, and there's 2 eyes staring at me. A big rat. Days as big as a squirrel. And you know, those rats are the smartest rats I ever saw. We put all our candy bars in those ammunition boxes with the clips. Hell, you had a hard time even opening them. And they could open them. They opened them cartridge box and ate those candy bars. Well, I tried to scare him, thought he'd run away. He wouldn't run away. He just kept there and never moved, and I wouldn't move either. So I had that 45 right there. And at 3 feet, I got that frat. And I took him by the tail and put him out in the middle of the walkway. So everybody could see the game we got there. There we go.
The next question I'd like to pose is, you know, we touched on the children a little bit, but tell me about any civilian contacts. Were there any memorable civilian contacts with the Italians specifically that you remember?
Yes, there were. We had a boy, about 15 years old, from Castelluccio, and he worked in a mess hall. And we used to give him food to take back to the family. And that happened in all the squadrons. The Americans were very giving. We had anything, we would share it. And the Italian people, they suffered terribly. It was the children and the mothers and fathers that didn't have things, didn't have food, didn't have clothing. And one of my buddies found a girl about 5 years old behind our squadron with a little bit. And he took the girl back to the squadron. This was Fritz. His name was Fritz Hoff.
Speak into the mic, please.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. He took the girl back to the squadron, And the squadron adopted this little girl. Kamalina was her name. And she was an orphanage. She was in an orphanage nearby. And the folks back home were sending clothes, shoes, and things for the children. And, this was in January. And May, of course, the squadron's breaking up. It has to go back home. So what does Fritz do with the little girl? He can't take her with him. He can't adopt her. He has to leave her there. And that's exactly what happened. Well, 50 years later, at one of these reunions, I made a trip to Castelluccio and I spoke about it. And Fritz came to my table. He said, "Will you go back to Italy with me?" I looked at him and I didn't think he was going to go. I said, "Yeah, I'll go back." Well, we did go back. 3 of us. Al Carino, he was a colonel in the Marines, and he was our Italian interpreter. And Fritz and myself. We went back to Castelluccio to find Kamalina. Now, 50 years have passed, but we had some names of relatives that were in the orphanage with Kamalina. And we'd go from village to village, talking to people to find out where Kamalina was. And by the way, I'm writing a book about that. And I'm not going to tell you the conclusion. You're going to have to read it.
Good for you, Archie. Yeah. My contact with Italians was very limited, and the only real contact I had was to the lady who came around and offered to do our laundry. And what you could do is, if you had a bar of soap, you would give her your laundry and the bar of soap. And that would be it. She was able to keep at the end of the washing cycle the soap itself, which was a payment. So it was a good bargain as far as we were concerned, money-wise. But I never had a chance to speak to any of the local Italians whatsoever, much to my chagrin, but next time maybe.
The thing that impressed me one time was a local Italian builder. He was an older gentleman, and he had a bunch of young Italians helping him, and they wanted to build a larger tent up near the headquarters, and it was raining, and mud and rain, and this guy is standing there helping those young kids build this tent, and they're wading in ankle-deep water. And the guy knew what he was doing, but he had bad help, I think. But also there was a baker that we would send.
It switched off.
Send.
Just a minute, Will.
Oh, did I touch something? We wore out the microphone.
How about if I give you this one?
Or censored.
I forgot where we were.
Italian baker.
Oh, yeah. We had these mattress covers, or there was another term they used, I don't remember. It was a 4-letter word, sack, anyway. And the baker would fill these things with bread, bring them to the squadron, but he'd keep a heck of a lot of it too. And it was terrific Italian freshly baked bread. And there was some other stuff they did maintenance-wise around the airfield that was very important. But they were industrious, but they were starving, and it was terrible.
There was an Italian fellow that worked at the airfield, a very nice chap, and we got to know him and were friends, and would try to speak to him with the fractured Italian that we had, and his English was no better. But in any case, at Christmas 1944, we decided to, my partner and I, do what we could for he and his family. And so we got together a lot of stuff, toothpaste and soap and that sort of thing, and gave it to him for Christmas. And they were delighted, of course, with things that they hadn't seen in years. And in order to do something for us, which they felt they had to do to make things even, that was their idea, not ours, they decided his wife decided to cook us a spaghetti supper. The only problem was, at the time they lived in Ortonova, which I think was mentioned earlier in this thing, because our base at Castelluccia was close by, and for some strange reason the name of Ortonova literally means new eight, which makes no sense, but in any case that was the name. But the town was off limits and we're not supposed to go there. So we decided, after much discussion, to take a chance and drive in there late one evening and pick up this stuff, this spaghetti, and retreat very carefully and quickly from the town, and hope not to get caught by the MPs. And this was accomplished. We got this spaghetti. It was in an open container. We had a Jeep, and we drove and picked it up, and we headed back to the airfield where we were going to have spaghetti supper. The only problem was that it was a dry evening and had been dry for some time, and the dust the car created as we drove along began to circulate around, and this container with the spaghetti in it was open, and of course the dust got in the soup, so to speak. And when we started to eat it, it was really terrible, and besides which the spaghetti was gray in color because they had no leavened flour. It was all gray and had not been leavened, and that was all they could get. Well, it was lousy stuff, but their mind was right and their thoughts were right, and they were dear people, and we certainly enjoyed their friendship.
I'll have to tell you a heartbreaking story. When we first got there, at breakfast time, there would be 3 or 4 young children show up, about 5, 6, 7 years old, where we go out to empty what's left in our mess kit. Man, you didn't empty it, they wanted it. They took everything you could get. They was all starving. And I'll tell you, that broke your heart to see this.
Well, main contact I had was with the tailor in Chernola. I went to the PX and I bought the biggest pair of pants they had, size 60. Went to the tailor, took my whole uniform there to the tailor, and I said, I want you to copy this for a 3-year-old, which my son would have been about the time, about 3-year-old when I got back. So he says, what size? Well, I wasn't sure. So he brought out about 8 kids, all 1, 2, up, clear up. I picked the one to be the model. And they made that suit, the pants, the suit, all the buttons, everything, all the rigmarole on that little suit, plus the hat, for 2 cartons of cigarettes. Then you go to the barber, and the barber in Chernola, he cost him about $5 for a bar of soap. So when he shaves you, he just touches here, touches one. That's all the shave you got. Just a little thing. That's about the only Italians I met.
Thank you, and I just sort of got the cutthroat sign from Jonathan here, so it's interesting how time flies, and our time's about up. And I got a million more questions, so maybe we can continue this next year. But one question I was going to ask you, and maybe I can just pose it to you because I think I know the answer, is would you do it again?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is that do we have consensus on that from all of you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much, and thank you for your service.